So I don't have the book, unfortunately. Just pretend. It's called The Light of Egypt.
Sounds magic.
It is in a way, by Thomas H. Burgoyne. Pretty good book that deals with science and spirituality and some thoughts on, I guess you could say, like a spiritual interpretation on how one would talk about like atoms and matter forming and how it interacts and exists in the world. So like it's basically like if you took a scientist and you asked him to explain in like spiritual sort of metaphysical terms like how atoms are, how matter exists, how it behaves in a world. And there's this one passage that I wanted to read that I thought we could have a little talk about.
All right. It's
very interesting. And I think he's talking about science. Around the time that Mr. Burgoyne wrote this book, it's like the late 1800s, so it's like right near the turn of the century into the 1900s, and science is realizing that things behave sort of tricky when you look at fundamental particles in physics, and that they won't behave consistently when you observe them versus when you're not observing them, which is kind of frustrating, especially for measuring things and accurately measuring and calculating out how these particles move. So like the most famous example is the double slit experiment, where they figured out that light has properties of both a wave and
you're talking about the observer effect, yeah. So it's light behaves like a wave and a particle.
And a particle. Thank you.
Particle.
Thank you. Like a wave and a particle. Jesus. So anyway, Burgoyne is talking a little bit about this, and he talks about how science has gotten to a point where it can't, like at any time in history, science can only explain so much, and it can only go so deep into the universe. And he talks about, at the time, what scientists called the aching void, which is just this point where you can't go in any further, you can't zoom in anymore, you can't actually observe what's going on in this space. You know particles are doing stuff in this space, but you can't actually observe it without altering it in such a way that you're not getting a good reading of what's going on. He says, "This realm of the unknown imponderables is the universal ether, an infinite ocean of something, which science created in her frantic endeavors to account for the material phenomena of light and heat, and for a time she was infinitely pleased with her own peculiar offspring. But it has become a restless phantom, a grim, unlovely specter, which haunts the laboratories of her parent, night and day, until at last science has become frightened at her own child, and tries now in vain to slay the ghost of her own creation. She dares not enter the aching void she has called into existence, and there pursue and recapture the truant atoms and timid vibrations of this sublunary sphere."
Oh, wow.
A little dramatic, to say the least, but I think he makes a very good point that I have a lot of respect for science, and it's done a lot, and it's really cool. But like modern science, like the institution of science, I guess you could say, like it's almost dogmatic in a way with some stuff, where it's like it's unwilling to necessarily like look at things from a non-scientific perspective. And I get their whole thing is to look at things from a scientific perspective, but it's this idea that science is the only answer and the only way to explain everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just sort of what I have a problem with. I think that's what he's trying to
change
point
that
out.
mindset. Seriously. Exactly. Absolutely change that mindset, because I think Matt said it perfectly months ago. He said, if you're going to define your world based on just the way numbers and things like that work, then that's a very kind of closed-minded, in a sense, way of seeing things. Mm-hmm. And please, I'm not at all attacking science at all. In fact, my second bachelor's degree that I'm working towards is in the field of science. I hold a high value to that. I just heard this recently, but he's saying that obviously spirituality and science, I think, should remain separate.
Spirituality and science, like science Okay, so religion, like, I guess, let's take religion out of this, because religion and science tend to not like each other a whole lot, and that's like it's a two-way street where they both don't like each other. But spirituality is a little bit different, and science still doesn't really like spirituality. Science kind of tends to sneer at it a lot, I think. And they don't have to be at odds, and it's not the case that not everything can be perfectly explained by science, and science still tends to think that it can, and it will refuse any other way of looking at things, specifically spirituality, to try to help answer it. My favorite example is love. Because science can explain a lot about love and a lot about its material basis and everything. I think you would be very hard-pressed to try to prove scientifically and mathematically love. Like, true, deep love in your heart and your soul. Like, prove that mathematically, where you can make up a formula, and if you just showed somebody this formula or gave them this formula somehow, that it would control their ability to love.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think science is ever going to be capable of fully explaining it, because you can make the argument there's psychology behind it, there's neurochemistry behind it, there's biological impulses,
chemical
for
processes,
for breeding and things like that, and it's like, all that's true, and I'm not saying that's not true, but most people feel that that's not true in a fundamental way that you can't just sweep under the rug or brush aside as just a subjective gut feeling.
Because you can't make someone love you.
No, you can't.
It's something you have to build, and it's a two-way street.
Like, for example, take the movie The Shape of Water. Great example. It's this thing that kind of exists, and it's not always 100%. Sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up. It's this very dynamic, shape-shifting entity that exists, like, within us and how we feel towards someone.
And it's just like the same way that no religion is, I think, wrong, but no religion is the one right one. Like, they all have, like, think of it like they're all looking at some gem, some whatever, super gem that's God, whatever you want to call him or her or it, whatever, them, whatever, and that they're all looking at different facets of the same gem and different sequences of colors, but they're all looking at the same thing. They're just interpreting it differently, and a lot of the time when they bother to look around, they realize that it's not even that people have different colors, it's that people just have the same colors, they just put them in a different sequence, metaphorically speaking.
Wow, that's great.
And that's the only real difference. And it's like, I feel like that same principle is true for different disciplines. So like science, even science. Like, science is also math. It's like every freaking scientist that does things and that tries to prove things in the world relies in some way, shape, or form on math. So it's like you are already out of the gate relying on another discipline. And I suppose the argument could be that math and science are so interrelated. But that's exactly my point, is that everything is interrelated. You can't go into it with one discipline that's going to perfectly explain everything.
Can't have one without the other.
And that's exactly what good old Burgoyne's getting at there, because he's like, I don't know, we could get to a point where we can actually observe these particles, but he's pointing out, like, you found out apparently, like, and you're so proud of this, like, the most fundamental particles, and then we ended up finding even smaller later, so nope, it just keeps getting smaller, but it's like, and then you try to look at these things and observe them, and it's almost like you could think of these things as the primary, smallest, most fundamental agents of God, of whatever, of the universe, if you're looking at it from a very science point of view. And yet, you try to look at it, you try to look at God, and he just zoops away. Nope, you can't observe me. Nope, you can't track me accurately the way you want to.
That's deep right
there. It's not
going
to work. It's not going to work that way. And so it's like, well, maybe this isn't the way that we get there, and that we find it. Maybe it's more abstract, and it's more conceptual, and less material and tracking and numbers and measuring.
I wholeheartily agree. I don't even want to try to add to that, because I think that is really excellent what you just said. Absolutely.
Check out The Light of Egypt, and also if you like that, or if you like anything like that, highly recommend checking out the works of Walter Russell. He's an American. I think artist is what they have him up there for, his primary thing, but he's a really smart guy, and he had this sort of, I guess you could call it religious or spiritual, sort of vision-y experience, and he wrote a lot about what he thought about the nature of the universe and science and everything. And a lot of it's really interesting and really smart, and he sort of talks about this, where picks up where Burgoyne was going, and he talks about how everything in the universe, if you think about it, you can conceptualize everything in the universe as just being made of light in different rates of vibration. It sounds weird, but it's very interesting, and the way he sets it out is very persuasive. There we go. Very persuasive.
I think that makes a lot of sense too, because our physical world is a lot of things mostly have like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, you know,
everything.
Star stuff.
That's right. We are all stars, literally.
Even you.